This is the second video in my series on local churches and God's worldwide movement. And in this video, I'd like to talk about developing a church strategy to be involved in what God is doing around the world. Now, the first question is, why develop a strategy in the first place? And I do think you need to be cautious. Strategies and management and planning are often presented as the solution to all of life's problems. But as Christians, we need to be really careful that we don't plan so much that we leave no room for the Holy Spirit to be at work. Our planning, our strategies have got to be done prayerfully, but they must always leave space for God to break in and do something different. That being said, let's just think some things about strategies. First of all, the world is huge. There is just so much happening that no church, even the biggest congregation, can support everything that is going on around the world. So you need some fashion, some way in which you can choose what you're going to focus on, what you're going to give your attention to. And I think it's better to do this in a prayerful, thought-through fashion rather than just on the whim or because you had a visiting missionary. Call me cynical, but my observation would be that quite a lot of churches build their support for what's happening around the world based on which mission agency has the biggest advertising budget. And I'm not convinced that that's good either for churches or for agencies. So all churches need some way of deciding what they're going to support. A good strategy will allow church members to get involved in supporting work in one part of the world rather than having a constant churn of information that changes all the time. And I think a good strategy should shape a church's missionary prayer slots. What are you going to pray for? What are you going to give your time to? Some churches, that praying is all they can do. They don't have the capacity for supporting tons of missionaries. A good strategy would also allow you to know how to respond to requests from agencies or from missionaries who'd like to come and speak to your church. If it's not part of your strategy, don't invite them. It can also help in defining your strategy for supporting short-term mission trips. If someone from your church congregation says they want to go off on a trip, does it fit in with what you're supporting already? It can help with your decisions about supporting long-term missions. Having some sort of strategy, some sort of choice in place really helps with those things. Now, your strategy should be brief, it should be easily grasped, it doesn't need to be complicated. And I think there are two things that are key. They are geography and ministry. And actually, you can perhaps forget geography. That being said, some churches like to shape their strategy for involvement in what God's doing according to geography. They'll have a support for, say, East Africa. A lot of churches in Britain focus on East Africa, though they won't often focus on more needy areas like Central African Republic, but that's just my bias. I think much more important is to think in terms of ministry type. What is being done? And I think this should be the driving force behind our strategy. And I think there are some things we need to focus on. Any church that calls itself evangelical should have a concern for those parts of the world where there are very few Christians, what we might call the unreached. Paul was concerned to preach the gospel where no one else had, and we should be concerned for that, whether it's in terms of sending missionaries, whether it's simply in terms of prayer. The unreached should be a focus. We should also have a concentration on Bible ministry, be that Bible translation, be that training people to handle the Bible. They're things that should be important to us as evangelicals. And I also think we should have some sort of focus on social action, be that relief of poverty, medical work, advocacy. This should be part of a holistic framework which includes evangelism and Bible training, but it should be part of our work. And something else which I think is very, very important is the notion of mutuality. When we're considering how we're involved in what God's doing around the world, we shouldn't just think about us giving. We should think of us being on the receiving side. Now, this, by its nature, is much harder to organise. How do you organise for somebody to give to you? But I think there are a number of things we could consider doing. Invite a missionary from another part of the world to come and work with your church. Most churches in the UK struggle with evangelism. Get an evangelist from Latin America to come and work with you and help you. Set up a real partnership with a church somewhere else in the world, a partnership which is mutually enriching. Global Connections have an excellent document on how to do this. I'll link to that in the show notes and in the and under the YouTube video so you can find it. Or perhaps just meet up with a local congregation in your city. Is there an African church meeting in your town nearby? Why don't you start off the ministers just getting together? It might be a challenge because you'll see things differently, but start meeting together as congregations, learning to give and to receive from other people in parts of the world. Now, there are lots of other types of ministry that churches can be involved in. Support for persecuted Christians, student ministry, all of those are good things. However, I do think it's wise to limit it to 2 or 3 things to help people get their minds around something and stick with it. 2 or 3 areas of focus are probably enough. Of course, it's possible to combine some of those things. By Bible translation for an unreached people group captures the Bible and the unreached, and there are other ways you can do that. And in all of this, remember, you have to leave room for the Holy Spirit to work. In the next video, I'll talk about ways that you could go about developing a strategy.